Hey everyone, Wazoo here, and in this video we're going to be tackling how to consume a JWT, that's a JSON Web Token authentication service using React for our front-end client. Yeah, we're finally doing it, everyone. This is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be talking about React, of course, and React Router for some navigation, and React Redux, which is a way of storing data state in the client. In a previous video, we tackled setting up a JWT authentication server using Java Spring Boot. I'll put the link in the video up here as well as in the description down below just so you can get caught up if you missed it. And what we're going to do is work from the point where we left off and add a React front end to it. I think this will be a lot of fun. This will be really interesting. Use the timestamps down below to go through and figure out what sections you want to repeat or where you want to skip ahead to, and we will get started. Okay, so as you can see, I've got a pretty basic vanilla testing site up using React. I've just called it the React JWT Authentication Tester. If you recall, in our Spring Boot backend, we've got a few API endpoints that we've put in. We've got a few testing endpoints that are guarded by token authorization. And then we have a SignIn and SignUp endpoint built into the backend. So we're going to be testing against all of those links. And so right here, we can go to sign in and we get a lovely little form. And the first field is our username, which is our email address. So I'll be using our default admin@admin.com and then our password of password. So once we hit sign in, we get the token response from the server, which then gets stuffed into our Redux store. And let's go back home. And now it shows up back on our homepage. And we'll always be getting this warning from Google. I can't seem to get rid of it. It's super annoying because it's of course telling me that password is a really insecure password, but I'm running on localhost, so it should be smart enough to figure out to ignore this when you're on localhost. At any rate, just keep clicking OK when you see that. So we have our JWT token in Redux, and it's showing up here on our page. And so it will be submitting it back to the server when we do any API request. So let's start with our anonymous test service. And we get our result. Everyone can see this, which is what we expect. And we've logged in as our admin user, so we'll also be able to see the admin response, which is only admins can see this. Hurrah! And now let's see what happens if we try to hit the user's endpoint, which of course should fail because we are not logged in as a user. Hit the test button and we get a nice error message coming back saying invalid credentials and/or access level. So yeah, that's our basic demo. We can use the sign up form to sign up a new account as you would expect to do. But instead of going through that, we will just get going with tackling setting up React. All right. So grab your favorite beverage. Mine is typically a nice hot coffee with a sprinkle of cinnamon on it. And let's get started. Okay, to get started, all we have to do is reopen our Spring Boot project in IntelliJ. At least that's where I opened it. And I've just started it up. We can leave it running in the background. We never have to go back to it. We won't be needing to touch it during this front-end tutorial, so it's just handy to have it running in the background. That way we can test it as needed from our front end. So open a terminal window or command prompt, however you want to call it. And in the root of our application, I'll just do a quick ls, and you'll see that I'm right in the root level of our JWT authentication server folder there. And what we're going to be using is a front-end bundler called Vite. So it is very similar to technologies like Webpack, but it's a lot more friendlier to work with, and we can get into React. It has a React template built into it right away. And we also don't really want to use Create React App anymore. I believe the latest news from the React team is to discourage the use of Create React App. I think they've sort of pulled the plug on it. So they are recommending that when you start a new React project that you go a different way. So here on the command line, let's just type in npm create vite at latest. And then we should get a prompt of what we want to call our new project. So I am just going to be calling it React Frontend. Okay, and for our project, we're going to just be using React and JavaScript. So now it's created a new folder for us within this root folder called React Frontend. So let's go into that and let's run npm install. And npm will do its thing. Now npm run dev will run our local development server and allow us to get started right away on compiling and working with our React code, but I'm not going to run it just yet. I'm going to install a few other packages that we are going to be needing. Let's start with React Redux. So npm install React-Redux and React-router-dom and at redux.js/toolkit and save. So we'll be touching all of those technologies as we go through the process of creating our React application. So let's go ahead and open this code up in your favorite editor. I'm going to be using VS Code for this one. Okay, so we have here our standard Vite React project built. You can see here for our dependencies, we've got our Redux.js toolkit, React DOM, React Redux, and React Router DOM. And we've got our familiar vite.config.js. So the first thing we're going to do is update the vite.config.js to remind it that we are working with a local server. And that way it will act as a proxy for us when we make our API calls. In other words, when we're telling React what URL to use to make our network request, we don't have to put in HTTP localhost port 8080/API blah blah blah. We can leave that in this React config, and then we won't need to hard code that in our code. Okay, so let's jump into the vite.config.js file. And right after this plugins section, let's create another key called server. And then within that, we'll make another one called proxy. And we'll define a /API, and it will have a target of HTTP localhost 8080, which is where our Spring Boot server is listening on. And we'll define change origin to be true. And that's all we will need. Okay, so with that done, let's go back into the terminal window, the same directory that we are working in, and let's just type in npm run dev. And Vite will do its thing. It'll run its React bundler, and it will be publishing on localhost 5173. So we can leave this running while we're working on the rest of the app. That way, changes will be instantly picked up, and then we can test them right away when we need to. So let's open up a browser to localhost 5173, and you can see we get a default page here, Vite plus React, and it's got a neat little button here. So if we hit the button, it'll increment a count, which is a way of just demonstrating state on the page, and then just a few more instructions and links here. So we're going to be getting rid of all this. So let's jump into main.js. Okay, so we got our default React set up here. We've got a strict mode tag declared around our application. So instead of using the application, which is the default created by this template, we're going to leave this alone, and we're going to create a new component called home. And that's where we'll have our main testing links that I demonstrated during the demo. So first, what we're going to do is we are going to create some routes using React Router DOM. So we'll need to import browser router, routes, and route from React Router DOM. And then within this React strict mode, we are going to declare a browser router declaration. So let's just remove app right there. And then we're going to define some routes. So let's create a routes declaration, tag declaration here. And the first route we're going to define is just a home page. So route path equals slash, and then element equals, and I'm just calling it home. So we haven't created it yet, but we'll declare a home component here. React Router will see that we are using the default slash, and then it'll redirect us to the home component. So let's remove this import app up here, and let's create a import home from /home, which we will create right now. Capital H. Okay. So in the source folder, let's create a new file. We'll call it home.jsx, and we will create a empty component here, and be sure to export default home there. So all we need to do in React is everything becomes a function. So every component becomes a function. And what we'll need to do is we'll return a, let's see, what are we going to do by default? Let's just declare a div container, and let's create a title for our page, React JWT Authentication Tester. That was my long-winded title for this. And we'll fill in the rest as soon as we get more of this going. Okay, so we've got our basic home component. We're returning these HTML elements and using React Router to handle the default /route. So if you go back to localhost port 5173, you should then see React, the H1 of our page, React JWT Authentication Tester. And it looks rather giant in this because I've got the browser level zoomed in pretty high to make sure you can see it. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is on our testing page, we had a sign up and sign in links. So we're going to stay in our main.jsx, sorry. We're going to be adding two routes, one for sign in and one for sign up. Okay, so route path equals /sign in, and our element here will be the sign in component. And then we'll do a similar thing for path equals /sign up, and the element will be, of course, sign up. That'll be the component that we'll create next. So we have two new components, sign in and sign up. And so let's do what we did here with the home. Let's import sign in from ./sign in, and then import sign up from ./sign up. And then let's go ahead and create these new components in our source folder. So new file signin.jsx, and then new file signup.jsx. And we can just basically cut and paste what we have from the home, and just to make sure that we've got everything handling properly here. So let's rename this to sign up, and we'll rename this title to sign up, and then sign in, we'll rename the title to sign in, and rename the export to sign in. Now we won't be able to actually navigate to these components yet, to these routes. So what we'll need to do is update the home JSX to have links to these two additional pages. Okay, so what I've done here is I've created a unordered list, sorry, not unsigned. And then for each element, I'm using the React Router link helper. And we want to go to /sign in. And then similarly for sign up, we want to create a link component reference to open squiggly /sign up. And make sure that you're using the backticks for the for defining the URLs, and sign up. If you use React Router's link helper component, then it'll take care of putting together the proper link element and navigation for you. So let's go back to our browser. Oh, and also don't forget that we have to import link from React Router DOM. Okay, so let's go back into our front end here. And notice how we now have two links, sign in and sign up. So let's go ahead and go to sign in. And we're on our sign in page. And if we hit sign up, we go to our signing component. Excellent. So far we've got 3 components set up, all using React Router DOM and a pretty basic setup. So let's go ahead and work on creating forms for us to handle the sign up or the sign in. So for sign up, if you recall, our Spring Boot service accepts a first name, last name, email, and password fields. And that's what's needed to sign up a new account through the JWT Spring Boot server. So let's go ahead and create that on the sign up component. Okay, so we've got our H1 sign up title, and let's create a form element. And on submit, we will create a handler called just handle submit within squiggly brackets there. So we've got our form set up, and what we're going to need to do is track the state of 4 input fields, one for first name, one for last name, one for email, and one for password. So to do this in React, we can use something called useState, which is a way of just tracking the state of our current component here, which is the sign up component. So the way to do this is we declare a const and then an array, with the first parameter being the name of our variable. So in this case, it'll be first name. And the second parameter is the function to call to set the value of this first name. So usually it's set first name, like set the word set in front of the name of the variable. Okay, and then you equals it out, and in our case, we'll just use state, and you can pass in a default value that you use to initialize the variable first name. So in our case, it will be an empty string. And let's just import useState from React. Okay, so we've got our first name set up here. So within the form, we can now set up an input, type equals text, and value equals squiggly brackets first name. And then whenever we update this field, the React will automatically call the onChange handler, not onChangle, onChange equals, and it will pass in a parameter for us. And all we need to do is call the set first name function with the value that you typed into the input field. So in our case, it's eTarget.value, because E is the actual parameter passing into that callback. And then let's close off this component. Okay, so before we can test, since we've declared the handle submit function in the form, let's just create a quick function here, a dummy empty function. So handle submit equals async E, it takes an E as a parameter, and then just E prevent default. And then we can even put in a console log form submitted, which should help us out when we want to check what's going on. Okay, let's go back to our front end. And so we now see that we have our input field, and we can start typing in stuff. And as we type in characters, recall that we are setting the value of first name, the first name variable in this sign up component. Okay, so let's go back, and we can add the other 4 fields, doing exactly the same thing. So we'll have last name, we'll have email, set email equals useState, empty string again, and password, which will be password, set password equals useState, empty string. And then we can just basically cut and paste this input element and update it for the other 3 fields. So 1, 2, 3. So the value will be last name, email, password, and we'll set the type of control on password to password, just so we get the nice asterisks that we're all used to. And then for our function, of course, we'll just do set last name for the last name field, set email for the email variable, the email state, and set password to keep track of the password state. Okay, so we've got our 4 fields here, and let's assume that that looks good. And now let's create a button for submit. So button type equals submit, and something like sign up. So the form, we should now see form submitted in our console when we hit the sign up button. So let's go back to our front end and let's type in a first name. Let's say first underscore user, last underscore user, and user@user.com. And then for password, password. We're not actually doing anything with it, but let's hit the sign up button. And presto, down here in the JavaScript console, we can see our log message saying form submitted. So we're handling our form okay. We're handling the state of these 4 variables okay, which is really awesome. So what we're going to be doing is creating a payload, an object that we're going to be sending back to the Spring Boot backend, which is still running. So let's call this const payload, which is just going to be a plain object. And we're going to define first name of first name, last name of last name, and email, which will be our email. And finally, the password, which is our password variable. Okay, so we've got our 4 variables, which are all putting together this object. And then what we're going to do is use the fetch API from JavaScript to actually trigger this call. So let's go ahead and type in fetch. And for our URL, we are going to be using /API/v1 and then /signup. And then our second parameter to fetch is where we specify our method, which will be a post. And for our body, what we're going to need to do is stringify this payload object. And then for headers, we're going to need to pass in another JavaScript object, and we'll just call this one, we'll just declare this as content type : application/JSON, which is what we need since we're processing JSON on the return. Oops, forgot the comma there. Okay, so we've got this defined. And then what we want to do with the response is we want to call the JSON function on it to convert the response to JSON for us to work with. And then we'll take that JSON, and for now, we'll just display it in our console log. So console log JSON. And then finally, a good practice is usually to have a catch to handle any errors that the server might return back to us. So let's take in our error. Let's take in our error object called error, and let's just console error the error. That's all we'll do for now. All right. So we're using fetch. We're declaring our URL to be /API/v1/signup. And recall that because we've configured the proxy back in the start of this video to use the localhost 8080 whenever we specify /API, then we don't need to be typing in localhost 8080 all the time. Okay, so we're in the signup. So let's go ahead and pass this into signup, and let's test this out. Okay, so first name, let's do first underscore user, and then last name of last underscore user. For an email, we'll just, I don't know, first@user.com, and then for a password, just password. And if we hit sign up, it should submit the network request to our API. And ta-da! For our response, we get the token back from the server. So if we go into our network tab, we can check the very bottom here where we've got our sign up link. And you can see the request URL. You can see that we've submitted a post. We got a 200 OK status from the server, which is all a good sign. For our payload, we have passed in the email, first name, last name, and password. And then the response shows what the server sends back, which is our token and our nice JWT token created for this new account. This is so awesome. All right. So far, so good. We're not actually doing anything with it in storing it into Redux yet, but we won't worry about that yet because next we will do the same thing in our sign-in component. Let's get these components working first. And then we will slowly add in some Redux. All right, so let's go into our sign-in component. And we pretty much have to work in the same thing. We just have to only handle 2 use state fields this time because we only have to worry about the email and password for logging in. So let's go ahead and import use state from React and then declare email and password the same thing, the same way that we declared it in our signup component. So const array first parameter is email and then set email equals use state empty string and then const password of set password equals use state empty string. Okay, and then we will create the form the same way that we did on the sign up. So form on submit equals handle submit function, just so we have some kind of consistency. And then we'll just declare our button first. So button type equals submit. And then let's put in sign in. And now we put in our input fields. So input type equals text. Value equals squiggly bracket email. And then on change equals open squiggly bracket, take the E as our parameter. And with an arrow function, shove it into set email, passing in E target.value. Oops. Sometimes VS Code loves to get in the way with those hovers. All right, and then input type equals password, and value equals squiggly password, and on change equals E with a arrow function to set password of passing in E target.value. Okay, so we got that declared. So let's quickly declare our handle submit function, which again, we'll just use a arrow function here. Let's see, console log. Well, first let's prevent the default. Let's call e.prevent default and then console log. And then we might as well put together the payload because we already know what that's like from the signup form. So let's set up another payload, const payload equals email, and then password of password. And then similarly, we'll be calling the fetch API. So fetch, and we're going to be going to /API/v1/sign-in. And then for our object that we pass, our method is going to be a post. And our body parameter is going to be the JSON.stringify of this payload object. And then for our headers, same thing. We only need to worry about the content type of application/JSON. Okay, let's get all this showing up here. All right. And then again, with the response, we want to call the JSON function and then take that response and we can console log that. And this would be the point where we stuff the token that we get back into the Redux store, but we won't be doing that just yet. Let's finish this off. We'll catch any errors. So catch error and then just console error yar. Okay, so let's go ahead and sign in. Let's go back to the home page. Okay, let's go to the sign-in form and let's run with admin@admin.com, and then for our password, and we should be able to submit it back to the API, and then it will return a new token for us. And as we see, we hit the sign in button and it has returned a new token for us. So if we go into the network tab again and highlight the sign in network name, we can then see on our headers that we're requesting the /API/v1/signin endpoint, which is what we want. We're using the post request method. We got a 200 OK from the server, which is all good. For our payload, we're passing in the email and password, which is what we expect. And for our response, we got a token with the value of the new JWT token that's created from this sign-in. So far, so good. We've gotten everything put together. And so now what we can do is we can use Redux to store that token in memory. And then that way it will be in our client state. It'll be available to us. That way we can make use of it when we make any JWT requests, which if you recall, we'll need to set the authentication header using that same JWT token that we get back from the server. If you want a further explanation of how JWT works, then I do recommend going back to my JWT authentication server video. There are some flowcharts and diagrams that I've went through to demonstrate how the server processes the JWT request from the front end and works with it. So that should also help you out here. Okay, so the first thing to do to work with Redux is just to recognize that Redux is meant to be a very simple package to use. However, it's quite easy to overuse it. And for a simple demo like this, it may not be always necessary to use a Redux for something like this, but I'm just including it as a basic introduction to working with Redux. So in our source folder, let's just create a new file and we'll call it store.jsx. And what we'll need to do is import configure store from the Redux.js/toolkit. And then we'll be importing, we'll define it after this, but we're calling it the token reducer from /token slice. And then we're going to be exporting a default configure store function call, passing in our reducer, which in this case, we're calling it token, which we're going to be building next. So we're just calling it token reducer. Okay, and then to activate it, we want to make sure that Redux is enabled on an application level. So for our entire component. So if we go back to the main.jsx, we'll be inserting it at a level above our browser router. We'll be inserting the Redux.js provider component. So let's first import the provider from React Redux package. And then now let's import the store that we just created from /store. Okay, so right after the React strict mode declaration, let's create a new provider declaration and passing in our new store object as the store for the provider. And then let's close off the provider tag. Okay, so that's all we need to do to make Redux available to all of our components in our application. And now let's go create the reducer. Let's create a new file and we'll call it tokenslice.jsx. Okay, so let's import create slice. from the Redux.js/toolkit. So we want to export token slice using the create slice function. And then let's end this with export default token slice dot reducer, which is what we reference from the store. Okay. So the name for this, we're just going to call it token. That's what I came up with. Super fancy, I know. For the initial state of token, we are just going to be using a value of empty string. And for our reducers, we are going to be creating a single reducer function called setter, which takes in the state and an action. And then all we do in the setter function is the state.value. So the state and then this same value parameter variable, sorry. So state.value, which is our variable, equals action.payload, which is how Redux will work with passing variables through its reducer. And that's it. This is all we need to get things working. I'm trying not to get too deep into the lingo of Redux because it gets pretty confusing between reducers, slices, etc. So it might be easier if you're seeing this for the first time to just see this as at a higher level, that when we pass in anything into this setter function, it will take the payload and store it into this value variable that we've created in this token slice. So as we use it, maybe it'll make things a little bit more comfortable in terms of how Redux is working, and then we can get into the lingo in a different video. So let's go back to our sign in component and make use of this new Redux stuff. Okay, so let's go to sign in, and what we want to do is we want to import, use selector, and use dispatch from React Redux. And then we want to import that setter function from the token slice. And that's how we'll work with setting it. Okay, so now right at the top of our component, our sign-in component, we want to declare token const token equals use selector, and we get the state and the token value. So the value of our token value. So our slice name and then the initial state of value. Or the state of value, not the initial state, sorry, the state of value. So basically, use selector is a way of creating a reference into that Redux store. And then we want to use const dispatch equals use dispatch. And so dispatch is just a function that we use in the reducer to basically update the value of token. So it's kind of like a reference to that function to update the value. Okay, so if we go down here to our sign-in flow, if we receive a token, so if JSON.token, then what we do is just dispatch, and the action we want to dispatch is we're calling that setter function. We want it to call that setter function and then passing in the result of JSON.token. Hopefully that's not too confusing. Let's see it in action. And maybe in here, let's see, in the setter function, let's do a console updated state 2 of token. Maybe that'll help as we go through working with Redux. Okay, so we take the JSON response that we get back from the API call. If there is a token field in that payload coming back, then we call the dispatch function, passing in the action that we want to call, which is the setter of the reducer along with the value of JSON.token. We forgot to declare one thing in our token slice here. We want to export that setter token slice.actions. We only have one function here that we are exporting, which is the setter reducer, one reducer function. Okay, so let's test this all out. Let's see this in action. And so let's go back to our sign-in component and let's use a sign-in that we know works, which is admin@admin.com with a password of password, and then call sign-in. And we can see right here, we submitted our form. We've got the token in the response from the API call, and we see our console log from the Redux store where we've set the value of the token state to that long string back. Perfect. So now this token Redux variable is accessible to us anywhere we want in our application, so throughout all of our components. So if you recall, we had a bunch of testing links from the homepage. So now that we have our JWT token stuffed into Redux, then we can now access it from all of our other components. So let's go back and look at the signup, and let's do the same thing in the signup component. Okay, so let's import our useSelector and our setter function into the signup. So same deal here. And let's cut and paste our useSelector. So what we're going to essentially do is when we either sign up or when we sign in, if we get a token back, we're going to stuff it into Redux. So we're just doing it again to reinforce how Redux is working. Okay, so if Redux, or not Redux, if JSON.token, then dispatch the setter function to update the value of that token Redux variable. So same deal here for sign up. So now it's in Redux. We're using it with dispatch. And now let's go back to our home component, which will make use of this Redux store thing. So import useSelector from React Redux. And we're not setting anything, so this is all we need. We don't need to worry about calling the reducer. And again, when we come into the home component, we can declare the same token as our useSelector, passing in the state and our state token.value. So it's just fetching the current value of the Redux, the current value of the token in the Redux store. And then we can even just console it out. Token equals token. Nice. Okay, so now when we flip back to the home page, the home component, sorry, then it should still pull the value from Redux, and then we can work with it. So in the demo, what I had is just displaying the token for us. So I can do the same thing here. So token, and then the value of token. Squiggly bracket, the value of the token variable as we load up our home component. Okay, so that should work. And then finally, I created a new form with a dropdown where you could select either the anonymous, the admins, or the user's API path, and then it would make use of that token in the fetch call to the backend and work with that. So let's create a form here, another form, and on submit, again, we'll use squiggly bracket handle submit. And then all we're going to do is declare a select input. And we are going to use a value of what I'm calling test type. And then on change equals val, and then set test type to be val. You know what? I'll use the same method that I've been using before. So e.target.value, just to keep things really consistent. Okay, and then what we'll be doing is making a test type useState declaration above, but let's finish our options here. So option 1, our value is anon. So for the anonymous API call, the anonymous API test call, sorry, and then value equals admins for the admins call, and then another option, value equals users for the users API test call. And then let's have a button down here to submit this. So button type equals submit and test. Okay, and then so we called this test type. So let's create another useState. So const test type, and then set test type within a variable equals useState. And I think we just can use a string. Instead of a string, the default test type will be anonymous. So if we don't pick anything, then we'll just use anonymous. Okay. And now we will create a handle submit function. So const handle submit. So what we're going to be doing now is we are going to be calling, we're going to set up a headers object. So the first thing we're going to have in this object is content type, which is application/JSON. And then now we're finally going to be also passing in the authorization header, which is bearer space and then the value of token. So make sure to use the backticks to use the JavaScript string interpolation to drop in the value of token within this. Okay, and then so we're going to be calling fetch, and then we're going to be using the backtick again for string interpolation. We're going to be using /API/v1/test, and then /, and then $, open squiggly, the value of test type. And then for our parameters, we are going to be using the get method. And for our headers, we're just going to pass in our headers. Okay. And then for the response, because the server is coming back with text field responses for these API calls, we just need to call the response.text function on that in order to handle it. And then let's work with the actual text that comes back, and let's just console it out. Text value is, how about text response is text. Okay, and then we will handle any error as we've done previously. So catch err, and then console.error err. So that looks about right. So we've got a call to the test API endpoint with the value of what we choose from the select, which is either /anon, admins, or users. And then we make that same fetch call, this time passing in the authorization header using the value of the JWT token that we've called useSelector from the Redux store. Okay. So let's go ahead. We'll have to re-sign in. Okay, so let's restart this application, refresh the page, I mean. We've got our sign in, sign up links as we normally do. We've got our new select form. With test, our token field is empty because, of course, we have no token value in our Redux store at the moment. So let's go to sign in, and let's choose admin at admin.com and password for our password field. We'll hit the sign in button. We get the token, which is now stuffed into Redux. Okay, so let's go back to our homepage, and we now see the value of token updated from our Redux store token variable, and we now can choose the 3 different tests. So let's test anonymous. And we see here the text response is everyone can see this, which is what we want. And since we signed in with the error, or since we signed in with the admin account, okay, so since we can choose where we are the admin access level, and we've signed in with the admin account, we hit the test button and our response is only admins can see this, which is what we want. And now if we choose the user's test type and hit test, we should see an error come in the logs. Here's the error. And if we go to our network tab and select the red users error, we can see that we've made the request to API v1/test/users, which is what we want, where we want to make a GET call, which is what we want. And we see that the status code on the call is a 403 forbidden. So this is all we see from the back end, but since this is a 403 forbidden, then this is essentially an error saying we don't have either it can't be the right credentials in this use case because we're not passing any credentials. We're only passing in the token. So we either have a bad token or our actual access to this endpoint is not allowed with our given account, which is in this case, which is what it is. Okay, and there we go. I think we've completed everything I wanted to cover in this small introduction to using React, React Router DOM, and React Redux. There's a lot of details that you can go into for each of those packages that are pieces of React, but I feel that if you're just seeing this for the first time, then it doesn't really help going too deeply into each of these as you just try to tackle getting a basic React application working. But we've got a small demo which is making use of our JWT service from our Spring Boot backend. Please clone the project, clone the source. I've got a little bit more error handling in the actual source code, so download it, check it out, walk through it with your JavaScript debugger, print out and console log everything you can to see and track how things are going through the React front end. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more like this. Leave a comment down below if you found this helpful or if there is some additional feedback you have, and I will be coming out shortly with another video soon. So stay tuned, everyone, and peace. Have a great day.